Welcome to the Launch Button Podcast, where we unlock the secrets of successful entrepreneurs and real estate investors who found the courage to hit the launch button and take control of their destiny. Join me, Hugh Zaretsky, best-selling author, seasoned real estate investor, and serial entrepreneur, as we dive deep into inspiring stories and invaluable lessons that will empower you to break free from the ordinary and pursue your true passions. Are you feeling trapped in a job that drains your passion and leaves you yearning for more? Are you ready to accelerate your business and or real estate investing to take it to the next level? It's time to ignite your dreams and embrace the limitless possibilities that life has to offer. Get ready to launch into the life you've always desired by pressing the launch button. All right, everybody, welcome back for another episode of the Launch Button Podcast. We've got an amazing special guest here today. As on the Launch Button Podcast, we always bring you people that are either launching into a new career, launching their business, or have been successful at what they've been doing. And we've got an extremely special guest here today, Mr. Michael Lechter. And Mr. Michael Lechter is an IP attorney, intellectual property. And as we get into today's world, it's becoming more and more important to protect yourself as you're doing this. And Michael's written several books about OPM, other people's money, and other people's making sure that we protect ourselves. And he's an international known speaker, entrepreneur, and attorney. He gets pulled into some of the biggest cases in the world, and yet he's here today with you. And that's just the special treat that we have for you here today. So, Michael, tell everybody a little bit about your background and a little bit about how you got started.
Good morning. Anyway, I started out as an engineer and was teaching at the University of Maryland and got fed up with the politics and found out about a position with a law firm doing investigation, technical investigation, and took the position. And next thing I know, I was taking the patent bar that let me practice before the Patent and Trademark Office while I was going to law school.
And when you say investigation, you were investigating what type of thing?
Infringement actions primarily, whether or not something was patentable, whether or not some bad guy was using trademarks inappropriately, that sort of thing.
Okay, awesome. And how did you find your passion for that? What really brought you into that industry?
Oh, well, I got disillusioned with the engineering field and was looking at somewhere that I could capitalize on my background, and found out that there are very, very few engineers that went to law school. So there was a huge need, and I determined to fill it. So I started practicing and was doing litigation for the big mainframe computer companies primarily, in addition to transactional stuff for smaller companies. And got to know people in the big firms around the country. And next thing I knew, I was joining one of the big firms and starting their intellectual property section. Now, back in those days, the big general firms did not have intellectual property sections. So this was a brand new thing. And there were some cultural clashes.
Coming from Arizona and being a Taekwondo heavyweight champion, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'd been in martial arts forever. All three of my kids had black belts. I was teaching for a while and use it every day, even though I don't really practice the physical aspects anymore.
But did that help you in your law practice? Did it help you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the mental disciplines that are taught in the martial arts, again, come into play every day.
So what was a tip you learned from martial arts that you apply to business or for that mindset? Because that's the biggest thing with people, right? Is that mindset.
The focus, primarily. I guess you would, apologies, my mind's not working this morning.
Oh, that's okay. It's all good.
Let me take a sip of this coffee.
Sure.
It's really just being a dog with a bone.
Yep. And you got Rex sitting right there. We got a chance to meet Rex at your lodge. We can't see him on camera, but he always hangs out right at Michael's feet. And we got a chance to hang out at the Cherry Creek Lodge with Michael and Sharon Lecter, and got a chance to go to Michael Lechter's shooting range and shoot some guns on his range, which I could see that big smile on his face. He loves that part.
That was fun. I tell you, I had a great time when you were there.
And we had a great time hanging out with you and Rex and being that dog with the bone. We even brought Rex some bones out there while we were running around so that he
and got to go out and ride the horses and take advantage of the beautiful country out there, like cowboy.
And that's your passion now, right? Your passion is that give back, that helping people.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. We're preserving the Old West lifestyle at Cherry Creek Lodge. We run a cattle operation that is pretty much the way they did it back in the 1880s, except that we've got ATVs that we can use. But the bulk of it's all done off horseback.
Yeah. And if you guys want an amazing experience, go to cherrycreeklodge.com. Make sure you go out there, you book that. You might get a chance to see the Lecters out there. Can't guarantee that. They show up sometimes.
You never know. And it's a little piece of Old West history. There were gunfights there, the whole deal. Every cowboy movie you've ever seen has a little piece of the Pleasant Valley War. It's a range war that took place back in the 1880s and revolved around that ranch.
Yeah, it's amazing. And Michael got the chance to tell us that whole story while we were out there. We got to hang out at him and Sharon's favorite spot. And, we got a little lost at the same time on one of our expeditions, into the mountains there. And the thing, when you start to have that success that you can get and build your dream, because when you talk about the lodge, you can just see it on Michael's face. His face lights up. He loves everything about it. If he could spend all his time there, I know he would. But, he's got to hang out with Sharon sometimes and, do some work.
Yeah, if I could figure out how to be up there full time without getting a divorce, I'd be up there in a minute.
Awesome. Well, and Sharon told us that you guys actually met because, she was going through a tough situation, and that's how you guys met. So tell us a little about how you and Sharon met way back in the day.
Well, this was back in I think 1979, and I was representing one of the big mainframe computer companies who had been sued by a company that Sharon had just gone to work for. And we literally met when I was going through her drawers. It was a very strange case, and attorneys listening to this may wonder what I was doing going through her drawers, but it was actually by order of the court. And we were looking for documents, and the opposing counsel wasn't permitted to be there when I was there. But he sent his wife, who was a matchmaker. I was newly divorced. Sharon was single, and she made sure we got together. So we kind of met on opposite sides of the courtroom.
That's awesome.
This was 45 years ago.
Yeah. I know you guys got grandkids and everything together, right?
Yeah. Been married for 44 years.
And that's amazing, especially in today's world with how much Sharon travels, how much she's out there, and you travel, and you've got your own cases, right? And you're doing all those different things that you guys make it work. What's been the key to?
During our early years, I was doing all the travel, and now she's doing all the traveling. So it was out.
Awesome. So what's been the key to the success of the marriage for people out there?
Well, I would say separate bathrooms, but it's about just showing each other respect.
Yeah.
Accommodating the other person's desires. So
awesome. All right, so let's circle back. Now that we know a bit about your history, we've used the martial arts, we've got the solid relationship. Let's talk about building solid IP protection for our company. What is the biggest mistakes that you see people make that are starting out?
Well, the biggest mistake that people make starting out is not paying attention to intellectual property or legal issues in general. I mean, there's a basic foundation that you have to lay for a successful business, legal foundation. You've got to pick the right type of entity. You've got to have the right contracts in place, and you've got to protect your intellectual property. If you don't, your chances of success is minimal.
And when you say intellectual property, for people that don't fully understand that, like that could be like your logos, that could be your things, right?
Intellectual property is I would call the fruits of the mind. It's an intangible asset, which, by the way, accounts for about 90% of the S&P 500 valuation today. Years back, it was that made up the bulk of the no more. Now it's the intangibles, the intellectual property. Okay, goodwill, invention, trade secrets, trademarks, designs, expertise. All of these things are intellectual properties, copyrights, works of authorship.
Okay. So 90% of the S&P 500 is now made up.
Yeah, it's probably higher than that.
Yeah,
probably higher than that. I mean, think about what are the big ticket items today. It's all the big tech companies,
right.
And they're based on intellectual property. Their database is intellectual property. That's right.
Your cell phone, right?
You've got more technology in that phone than NASA had to put a man on the moon.
Yeah. And it's crazy because you and I both started, I know you got the IT as well. That's where you were going to school for and everything like that. And back in the day, right, there were whole rooms of computers. Like a computer was the whole room.
I mean, literally. And they had less storage in the whole building than you've got on your phone.
Yeah. And that's all been the IP and making designs better, like you're saying, and that's all intellectual property, right? Intel's based on that, Apple's based on that, right? The algorithms are IP.
Yeah. I mean, think, all of your service companies, Amazon, Uber, all of those guys, they're all IP based. Now think of this. If you don't take the precautions to keep someone from copying as soon as it gets out on the marketplace, what do you think is going to happen? Your competitors are going to adapt and adopt. That's a polite way to say steal your stuff. And you've got to use the legal mechanisms that are available to you to protect yourself. And that's part of that foundation. Because once the cat's out of the bag, it's gone.
Yeah.
Particularly with respect to patents and all things considered, if something is patentable, that's your best bet. Because very few things can really be kept as a trade secret if they're out on the marketplace. Software, where you're keeping it on your own servers and you're able to restrict access to it, that can be kept as a trade secret. But here again, anything that's public is fair game, unless you got patent.
It's crazy to think about that, right? I mean, a lot of us know the McDonald's story, because oftentimes inventors are really great at inventing things, but they're not very good at marketing, right? It's like different skill sets. And so, like you said, somebody will have a great idea and then somebody will copy it and market it better and they become known for it, right?
And that happens all the time. You'll get a product out of I guess the perfect example is the spreadsheet software. Okay, back in the early 80s, I think it was, there were a couple of guys out of Boston that came up with the idea for an electronic spreadsheet. And I mean, it hit the market by storm. In my view, that created the age of the PC because it made PCs relevant, personal computers relevant for the average Joe instead of just the geeks like me. And it was great. I mean, it was truly revolutionary. The market, and next thing they knew, they were out of business because they didn't take the steps to protect. Now, you all heard of Lotus, right?
Right.
Okay, I'm not talking about Lotus.
Before Lotus Notes?
Have you ever heard of Software Arts? VisiCalc?
Nope.
Yeah. Well, that was the first software spreadsheet.
Wow.
Yeah, and if they had taken the right steps, I mean, they would be in space out there. I mean, Lotus didn't do so well either. I mean, now it's all Microsoft.
Yeah, Microsoft. We got Google now, Sheets. So we're just moving through, and you just see the iterations where if they didn't protect themselves, that's what happened, right? They don't register your website. You don't protect. We see that all the time with names and domains and all of that as well being as IPs. So let's just give everybody a little bit. I know you've got your 7 self-audit checklist steps that you have for people, right? That you go out there. And the first one is to help people identify your present competitive advantage. So can you give us an example of that for people?
Okay. So you've got a product and every successful business has to have some sort of competitive advantage. and you want to protect that. You want to get exclusive rights to it to the extent that you can. So you need to analyze your business and see precisely what it is that gives you that competitive advantage. And that means drilling down. So let's say you have a product that is more durable than anything else that's out there in the market. Okay, well, why is it more durable? I mean, you can't get exclusive rights to more durable. You got to figure out what it is. Okay. And maybe it was a particular order of steps in the production. Okay. If you did this before that, you got the durability. Well, you be able to get rights, exclusive rights to those steps. Now, think about the applicability of that technology to other fields. Okay, so it may be that you can license other companies to use that technology and not affect your core business at all. And that's the magic of licensing.
Okay. So you're talking like Mr. Wonderful on Shark Tank right here, got it from you, right? All his deals and deals. Right?
So this is, and that's the ultimate leverage, the ultimate use of other people's resources, because you can put all of their resources to work for you without spending a penny on what they're doing. And it's all about the way that you construct the license agreement. So let's say, and you can limit a license agreement to a particular goods, to a particular product line, to a particular area, particular time frame. I mean, there are very few limitations on what you can do. So you the license according to your business plan. Yep. And it may be, so if you're not going to get into a particular channel of trade for 5 years, maybe you can license somebody else to market in that channel for 5 years until you're ready to get into it. So it may make sense.
Yeah, no, 100%.
You know, and on top of that, you can make them use your trademark. Now you have to control the quality if you do that,
right?
Which is not a terrible thing. You want to keep track of what they're doing with your stuff anyway.
Yeah.
And so they're building your brand, building the goodwill associated with your company while selling their stuff. And again, at no expense to you.
Yeah.
Or no great expense.
Actually, my uncle has a funny story about this because he was for Raychem, one of the defense contractors, and something they invented ended up being used for the underwiring of the Victoria's Secret bras, right? So like, you know, you invent something for the military to protect the wires, and it was used in Victoria's Secret bras, right? So,
well, I mean, so much of the technology that's out there came from either DoD research or NASA.
Yeah,
I mean, it was, you know, and to mention the stuff,
right? And just to say how being repurposed and everything like that, and so you may never know how it's going to be used.
And part of the issue is that inventors, business people, typically have blinders on. They think in terms of their business and the problem. Well, that problem may reoccur in all sorts of different arenas that are not at all related to their core business.
Yeah.
So streams of income.
And that's why it's important you get set up right away and to somebody like you to be able to go ahead and do that and make sure that you're being protected, right, as you go to launch your product, even before you launch your product. Because as you said, once it's out there.
And before you launch your product, there are time limitations. You need to explore patentability and file for a patent application if it's appropriate before you go to market. Once you've gone to market, you've started time clocks or lost to the clock in certain countries. You won't be able to protect yourself. So it's to take a look at it early on, way before you offer anything for sale or use it in commerce.
Okay. So definitely reach out to an IP attorney because you never quite know what you're going to do. And, you know, Mike only works with the best of the best, but he's here to give you advice. And if you want to reach out to him, we'll make sure we have your list in there to be able to go ahead and do that for the podcast here. And do you have a So we talked about the spreadsheets, like nobody knew who they were and where they are. Is there another company that you could use an example of for people that might know in today's world that's having an issue with their IP, trying to get it back after they've already made the mistake?
Oh, wow. Well, let's talk about trademarks. There are a lot of terms that are commonly used today that used to be trademarks, and they lost the rights to those trademarks because they didn't protect them. They used them generically. They were so successful that people started using the words as the common term for the type of product. You think about Xerox. Now, think about aspirin. That used to be a trademark. Escalator, elevator. Their thermos was a trademark. It stopped being a trademark, and now it's sort of coming back because it's all about the way that public views the word. If it indicates the source, identifies the company that product comes from, as opposed to describing the product, then it's a good trademark. Okay, and another area that I see a lot of companies get in trouble is with trade secrets, confidential information. Now, anytime someone has access to information and there's no limits on how they can use it, there are no trade secret rights. It can't be considered confidential. Okay? Now, the way you would typically protect that is with a non-disclosure agreement or disclosure provision in another agreement, for example, or an employee agreement. Okay. Now, there are a lot of so-called NDAs that are out there that are anything but NDAs. They will destroy the trade secrets. Some of them right away, and those just what I would call a snake agreement. They call them non-disclosure agreement, but they give the recipient of the information the right to do whatever they want to do. There are a lot of big companies that use those. They don't want to take the responsibility of maintaining anybody else's confidentiality.
Right.
And so their agreements basically say anything you give us is, free game unless you got a patent on it. Okay. And they'll title them non-disclosure agreements. So people need to be careful about that. The more insidious agreements create an artificial lifetime for confidentiality. So we'll keep the information confidential for 3 years from the date of this agreement, or from 3 years from disclosure.
Right.
Okay, well, at the end of 3 years, you don't have any rights anymore. And now think about a situation that typically comes up in technology companies where they're looking at alternative ways of doing something. And only one way is viable, or one way is more viable because of cost. And so they put the other stuff on the shelf. Now, if they sign one of these limited lifetime agreements, at the end of the 3 years, they don't have rights to the stuff if they disclosed it.
Right.
Okay? They don't have rights to the stuff that they put on the shelf. And suddenly, because of advances in technology, it becomes the most viable way to do something. They've lost their rights. Okay, so you need to be very careful to make sure that these non-disclosure agreements say that something is going to be considered confidential as long as it meets certain requirements, and it fall into certain exceptions to confidentiality. Okay, the other problem that people run into is the logistics. When an agreement says that in order for something to come under the agreement, be confidential under the agreement, there has to be a notice on there. And if it's disclosed orally, there has to be a follow-up memo within so much time. Well, technologists don't do that,
Right.
particularly, unless it's strictly a type of arrangement. That type of thing just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And you got to be realistic about that.
Yeah, and I think most young entrepreneurs coming up, they if they get an NDA, that it protects them, right? Like they don't read the whole thing. They don't
Yeah.
have their legal team behind them to review everything. They're like, oh, it's an NDA. I'll just sign it. It's going to protect me. And most of the time, it's a one-way, right? It's usually the one way from the person that sent it, not a two-way, right?
That's
And
absolutely right. I mean, you got to read the agreements. You got to read, and that goes for the click wrap type agreements as well on the internet.
right.
When we get into the AI stuff, we can talk more about that.
Yeah. And so we're going to have Michael over on our private podcast here in a couple minutes. We're going to head over there to do that. But we wanted to make sure that you guys start to have that foundation. So now, if you think about today, we've talked about gunfights in the 1800s. We've talked about Taekwondo and using that mentality. We've gotten deep into IP, and some of you guys won't even know what Lotus Notes was, but understand that they could have made a company before them that we'd never heard of, that Michael knows about, would have been $1 billion company in today's world if they'd only protected themselves then. So it's important you do that from the very beginning. Before we wrap up here with a segment here, Michael, is there any general things that you want to share with somebody, or a tip or trick that, or a good story?
One of the things that we get into was making sure you own what you think you own, particularly with respect to copyrights. There are a lot of people out there that will hire a photographer or a videographer, and they think because they pay them, they own the rights. Doesn't work that way.
What, in today's social media world where everybody's out there shooting everything and posting everything and resharing it, they don't own it? What do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, they don't own it. Under the law, black letter law, with respect to the copyrights to any sort of work of authorship, which includes photos and videos, there has to be specific language assigning the rights to whoever's paying the bill. Okay? Otherwise, the owns the rights. Now, you may get a limited license for a single use, but when you want to reuse it for something, you run into trouble. Same thing with the website developers own the rights unless there is a written agreement that specifically assigns that rights to you.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure that you own that. What you think you do.
That's a huge tip for all the content creators out there, for all the launching, right? A lot of people hire people to build their websites. They think they own the website. But what you're saying right now is, if I hired somebody to build my website, they technically own it. So I got to get an agreement in place to say, hey, this is my content, right, for them, and to go ahead and backdate that or get them to assign those rights to me.
Yeah. And a teaser on the AI. If something is created by AI, there are no copyrights.
So we're going to dive deeper into that in the private podcast. So that's a great teaser right there. Michael, we appreciate your time on this public-facing podcast. We appreciate Rex hanging out with us and all the stories and all the great information. And what you guys may not realize is it may not be a super exciting subject. You probably just saved yourself thousands and thousands of dollars by listening to today's podcast. So thank you very much, Michael. We appreciate your time. We're going to have all your links in here.
Always a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure hanging out with you. And I look forward to hanging out with you next year at the ranch. And maybe we'll see you before then. And everybody, just remember, take that consistent daily action that's going to lead to success. And we'll see you on the other side. Have a great day. Thank you for joining us on the Launch Button Podcast, your gateway to unlocking your true potential and pursuing your passions. Don't let the journey end here. For more empowering insights, valuable resources, exclusive content, and free giveaways, visit www.thelaunchbuttonpodcast.com.